Continuing with our topic of Syria, I'm very happy to welcome Oleg Semenets, who is Ukrainian ambassador to Syria from 2008 until 2011. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting.
So the first question I had, because you had written a text that I'd read before, so before this week, and what really impressed me about it is you said that you were surprised that Russia hadn't used these arguments about the Russian world, the Ruski mir, and all this holiness connection in Syria. So why had that struck you, and are you surprised by how things are working now, or does it make sense?
Well, I was writing it exactly on the 24th of September. And it logically comes from the course Russians are taking towards Russian world. And I was surprised, of course, but on the other hand, I was not surprised that in 6 days after bombing in Russia, the hysteria has started. Hooray, Damascus is ours, like Crimea is ours.
When we had a statement from a representative of the Russian Orthodox Church who declared that Putin's war against terrorism in Syria, he called it a holy war, even.
Exactly. But even at the grassroots level, ordinary people, bloggers, they were very enthusiastic about that. And then on Russia 24 channel, I also saw one gentleman who is it seems to me, a director of some kind of research center for Middle East, who said that, well, it's a holy war. Syria is our sacred place, and we should defend it, because it is from there that Orthodox Christianity has come, and it was implanted to Russia from there.
Ambassador, you used to work in Damascus unless the Ukrainian embassy had been operating there. But in general, there is a lot spoken about the Russian airstrikes, but the Russian military had been present, not on that scale before. So for our international audience, how can you explain what were the Russian presence in Syria, both military but also political, it's a long history, but especially within the last years?
At that time, and I would say quite some time, Russia has been exerting very powerful influence on Syria, on its course, on the regime generally. Because Russia was supporting President Assad, the father, and they were also supporting his son after almost 30 years in power. And I would not say about the military forces, about some kinds of but basically they had very strong positions there, and specifically in the trade for arms. They supplied the regime with all kinds of weapons. I looked up in my notes, and in 2010, during the visit of the delegation from respective Russian agency, they signed contracts mainly for missiles and armored personnel carriers for about $1 billion.
And I remember you saying as well, during your time as ambassador in Syria from 2008 to 2011, there were military advisors and other people there. But could you also describe, I mean, this naval facility they have at Tartus, because it's often described as a naval base, but it doesn't seem to live up to that description.
No, it's gross exaggeration, because this, in fact, is a service point where they can refuel, where they can get fresh water. And there was also a mobile maritime workshop, which was coming and going from Sevastopol and back. And it was interesting that it was manned by the Ukrainian citizens from Crimea, like that. But basically...
But there is so much discussion about that one of the time, there is not such an ideological drive by the Kremlin. There are these ideas to preserve, the current regime in Syria, but to safeguard this naval base as the only naval base in the Mediterranean.
Come on, what kind of a naval base can we talk about? There are only two piers and one is out of order. So only one ship can come and go, get its fuel, get its water, get something mended, and that's all. But maybe, and this is what I feel maybe behind the Russian move to Syria, is that they want to really create a full-size naval base, and also we have the signs of building a Air Force base.
Well, and this is the interesting thing, that it's not just about the past. It's not just about protecting what they've had. You know, many people have said that this is the strongest foothold that Russia has into the Middle East, that Syria is the strongest basis they have to build up if they want to expand that.
It may be. It may be. And what is interesting, they are not, I mean, Russia is not only supplying airplanes, some other weapons, but they are also supplying and installing the entire craft equipment, which means that this is not intended to fight Islamic State, because Islamic State has no planes. Whom do they really want to counter there?
Well, it would seem Western countries and Turkey.
Who has planes there? That's it. That's it. And
well, and what are the historic connections between Ukraine and Russia, these former Soviet countries, and Syria? Because you were in Syria when they began evacuating Ukrainian civilians, so I know there are a lot of mixed marriages, right? Because Syrians had studied here and in Russia.
A lot of Syrians studied in Russia, in some specified universities, also in Ukraine, and in Romania too. And many of the former students were bringing their Ukrainian wives, or Romanian wives, or Russian wives, in thousands.
Well, because I'd read about this, and this was interesting, that I believe traditionally in Syrian culture you'd pay a dowry or make some sort of payment to the family. So for people who studied and you were in Russia or in other countries, being able to have a foreign wife was maybe not only physically very attractive, but also was a way of saving some money as well.
Well, this is in the field of guessing.
Too much speculation.
We can only speculate.
But how I'm also curious, the Russian military presence in Syria it was there before, but what has specially changed these days? How we really, what is so new besides the airstrike?
These days, I have similar sources as you do. So what I read now in the papers is that they are sending some Marines there. Maybe their number is not that big, and the general declaration is that they are not going to be involved in ground operations. So that's technical stuff, service stuff, and so far.
But my question, of course some things had changed since the war had started, but how Russia had been and is perceived in Syria, probably by different populations. So there was some sympathy before the whole conflict had emerged, but how it all developed even during the first years.
Now the whole Syrian society is in shambles. And that's why we simply cannot see what are the relations. Are they still existing? But before, yes, Russians were quite popular there, Many people like them. And maybe it's because their younger years were related to Russia. And so they remember Russia when they remember their youth.
Or those people who studied in that.
Yeah.
But it seems changing because, I mean, we've also seen in areas hit by Russian airstrikes, people protesting now. So it seems like that memory will be challenged, by people who are pro-Assad and who are working against Assad.
One has to be there in the field to feel that. But I think that the situation can deteriorate and change for the completely different.
Become changing all the time.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're so happy to have you on to give us a little more insight into the situation from your years there, and we'll hopefully have you back in the future.
Thank you. Thank you.